I hope your day is going well already, that there's some good things happening for you. We are diving back into Philippians today. It is working. Look at that. Fantastic. So a couple things just for you to know about. Number one, the document that is here, that document is linked on the Facebook post. So if you want to actually be in this document, either now or later, look at notes, whatever, it's available for you, including all the resources that we link for you to kind of go do your own study. If you didn't join us yesterday, that's when we started Philippians. So stuff about context or any of that, I'd love to have you join it. But really the heart behind what we're doing here is to provide a space for us to just share together, to begin together, having some daily time with God. It's a rhythm that we really believe in. And I feel like, man, there are some things that as we look back in this season, I hope God does and cultivates in lots of us. And one of those that I'm praying for Eastern Hills is that we would grow in our connection to God every day. And so the sequence we talked about, right? Pray, read, study, reflect, journal. And then within the study section, going from observe to interpret to apply. What does it say? What does it mean? What does it mean for me? So we're going to dive into a section in Philippians chapter 1 about that. We've got Pat Smith joining us. Look at this. Boom. Good morning, Pat Smith. Thanks so much for joining us. If anyone's ever brave enough, you can actually click the little link that I put in there. And if you have a webcam on your computer, you could actually join us. I believe someone's going to do that someday. I'm excited about it.
People are going to get brave. They're going to do it.
They're going to do it. I believe when we feel like we're cooped up enough, it'll be the first step for you. It's like,
right? It'll feel like we're all in a virtual room together.
Right. We'll be socially distanced, but digitally connected.
Yes.
So anyway, and then just a reminder, if you are in our community and you either need help or you want to offer help, kind of the way that we are doing that is through a ministry that we have called For Aurora. We want to be known for what we're for. We're for our city. We're for our community. A bunch of people were dropping stuff off yesterday. We're learning about kind of best practices in our community to be able to deliver care. We're working with some really big organizations in our city just to make sure that we can be a place, even as some more of the restrictions are being put on this week, to be able to house and help people. So whether you need help, you know somebody that needs help, or you want to offer help, those are the ways to do it. Cool. 2 minutes feels like we're doing good. We're on schedule. Okay. And Lisa, as you can tell, went big time and got herself a microphone. So let's go.
You know what? I say go big or go home.
Pat Smith said she's not going to join online the video because she hasn't brushed her hair yet.
Yeah, I get it.
Well, that makes sense, I guess. I mean, they make hats. You can wear a hat, but
yeah, we can send a JMLB hat.
Yeah, look at that. Yeah, we could do some swag giveaways. We'll try it out. We'll figure it out. All right, so we looked through Philippians 1 through 11 yesterday. We had a weird thing happen at the end where it got clipped off. So if you want to see some of the application stuff we talked about, we just typed it up and put it there. And now we are diving into 12, 1 through 18. Let me pray for us before we get started. God, I pray for everybody that's checking this out, either live or they're watching it at some point in the future. God, we're living in a time where it is easy to feel like you're not listening or you don't care. And I pray, God, that you would simply remind us of your presence today. That whether we're hanging out with kids at home or we are telecommuting or we're in, a bunch of different things we didn't expect that we would be in, through all the Zoom calls, through all the uncertainty, through all the question marks, God, I pray that you would just show your level of care and love for people. I pray that you would deliver care to those who are sick. I pray that you would deliver peace to those who are at risk and immunocompromised in our community and around the world, that you would keep them safe and healthy. And God, we pray that your healing hand would eliminate this virus, that there would be a day in the future that we would look back and just see the way you've shown up and worked miraculously to do some things that people couldn't ask, think, or explain. And I pray for your church, God, that your church all around the world, this would be a time when we would see people as the church and not buildings as the church, because that's the way you always designed it. And help us to love our neighbors well, help us to chase you well. God, thank you. Thank you for the chance to be able to grow in you through this time. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So here we go, Lisa. You want to read 12 through 18?
Yeah, I'll do that. Starting in 12. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the world, the whole imperial guard, and to all the rest, that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice.
Awesome. Just a quick reminder, if you weren't with us yesterday, Paul is in prison. The way that prison worked is he basically needed care packages to continue to make it. And so this church that he actually had a hand in starting in Philippi, sent this guy named Epaphroditus to care for him. And so he's so incredibly thankful, just encouraging them, praying for them. And then he really, I think, kind of moves into this place of wanting to put people at ease, like, hey, I'm okay. We're going to be okay. And even more than that, I think he's talking about how even in the midst of difficult circumstances, God's going to use this. And so anyway, as we look at it at like kind of an observation level, Lisa, where do you feel like kind of the words or phrases that need further definition are?
I think serve to advance the gospel, and then the whole imperial guard.
Yeah.
One of the things that always stands out to me just in my personality is the end of 14, where he says, much more bold to speak the word without fear.
Mm.
And then in those last parts, he goes into people that are preaching Christ, but they're doing it out of selfish ambition as opposed to this pure ambition just for Jesus.
Right.
But Paul kind of twists that and is like, hey, either way,
Yeah.
Christ is being proclaimed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those are good. We'll pencil through, or we'll work through those a little bit at kind of a definitions level. If you're watching, hey, what's up? It's Buffy online. And Bree, what's up, guys? Good to see you. Buffy's here. Morning to you. Bree's here. Good to see you. Oh man, so good. Say hey in the comment section. We'll say what's up. And if there are things that, like, maybe there are words or phrases that you would like to see defined, put those in the comments, or join via video. Just try it out. It's fine. Anyway, yeah, I think this idea of serve to advance the gospel, if you've not been with us, right, the gospel is simply placed this. It is both the message and the power that God uses to save people. It's, euangelion is the nerdy Greek word. It means the good news. And it's the mission of the church is to share the good news with the world. The good news is that even though we don't deserve it, even though we couldn't earn it, even though I'm destined today and every day forever to be separated from God because of who I am and what I've done, God loved us so much that he sent his son Jesus to die on our behalf. And that because he took on the sin, the guilt, the shame, and the pain that I deserve, now I can place my faith in him. I can place my trust in him. And he says he didn't come to judge the world. He didn't come to, like the thief comes to rob, steal, and destroy. He came to share life in abundance. And so what we say around the Eastern Hills is we say Jesus came to make life better, not easier, but better because it's with him, and provide eternity. And so, that message, as you think about that here, Lisa, served to advance the gospel, right? He's talking about his imprisonment. How do you see that connecting?
Well, I think for a lot of us, we would assume that if you end up in prison, that your message goes to prison with you. It's basically over. And what Paul is reminding the Philippians is that actually his imprisonment is advancing it. It's moving it forward. This good news isn't going to stop just because Paul's behind bars or in house arrest or whatever, but it's still moving forward. It's more powerful than the chains that are binding him.
Yeah, that's good. And he kind of further explains that by talking about how the whole imperial guard now knows the gospel. What is he talking about? What is that like? Is he playing Dungeons and Dragons? Like, what is the imperial guard there?
No, he's talking to whoever he's living with in this house arrest. It's probably maybe a governor or something like that. But all of the guards that are around him keeping him where he is, they've all heard his message now. And so it's even traveling into Rome via these guards.
Well, and a couple weekends ago in services, we talked about Acts 16, and Paul was in prison with Silas, and like essentially the jailer ends up meeting Jesus because of their testimony, because of what they're doing, their story, the way that they show up when crazy things happen. So that's awesome. Hey, we got some new people that have said hello. Good morning, Siri. Siri was my admin for, I don't even know, Siri, you would know, a long time. Longer, like, I think probably being my admin felt like more years in her life were coming off than just the years.
They shaved life off her.
That's right. And then Sherry's here. What's up, Sherry? Good to see you. Thanks for coming on, guys. And so, then it says that there's really this kind of echo effect, right, through his imprisonment, that when we experience pain, when we experience suffering, there's actually a way that can kind of radiate a message of hope, that when we can live hope, even in difficult circumstances, I think that Paul would say that our hope gets louder because there's so little of it around us, right? We get that message that, in kind of the darkest moment, lights shine the brightest, right?
Yep.
And then he says, and most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment. So he's talked about the guard. He's talked about the others that are in imprisonment. Most of the brothers. Who's he talking about here?
Other believers in the area and throughout the Roman Empire.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure for them, I mean, it feels like at some point, I look around today even, and I see the people that were following Jesus well, and then something difficult happened to them. And some of them, they like rise up and are able to press through and lean into people and trust. And then you see other people, and there are these stories that you're like, oh my gosh, I think they're kind of walking away from God for a season. And I don't know their story, but I think there's probably at some level, there must have been a place where people were like, hey, Paul's in prison again. Okay, is he good? And then people are like, yeah, like he's literally like the guards and prisoners are meeting Jesus. Like at some point, I think that probably just gives hope to everybody else. Like, oh, we're all in this together. Even the guy that's in jail is doing this. Like,
and going to jail was a very real risk that the believers were taking on a regular basis. And so to see their leader leading so well in those difficult circumstances, I'm sure that just empowered them to keep moving.
Absolutely. And then that's kind of where he finishes this little section, right? He says, much more bold to speak the word without fear. And you said you feel like for you personally, there is kind of something about this, like, you resonate with this. Maybe share a little bit of why that is.
Yeah, I have spent a significant amount of life just kind of hiding behind fear and using that as a defense mechanism, and have been paralyzed by it at certain points in my life. And so to read these encouraging words of boldness and without fear, that even when things are crazy all around us, that we can still be bold because of Jesus, and we can still live without fear because of Jesus and because of this message that he has given us to share with those around us.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like for a lot of us today, in 2020, like bold would be much more than where we are right now. Like
1,000%.
We're sort of slow pedaling it. We're like, oh yeah, I do some church stuff sometimes, but what does it mean for me to personally follow Jesus? What does it mean for me to personally choose joy? I think about the urgency that Paul talked about in the first 11 verses. And he's like, even more as the day draws near, that you would show greater and greater love. Right. And so I don't know. I mean, I might, if I was studying this passage just on my own, ask the question, what does much more look like in my life, right? Because I think Paul obviously has a thought in his head about what this is going to mean for individuals in that moment. But like when we apply it, we have to ask like, okay, maybe I'm not, living in prison in the first century, but what does it look like for me to speak up in situations with boldness, full of grace and full of truth? How do I do that? So anyway, just a little note for myself for later. And then he says this thing we talked about, right? Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry. Tell me, what do you think he's trying to get at here?
Well, I think it would be easy for certain folks to feel a little bit threatened by Paul. He's just an amazing teacher, and God was using him in these really powerful ways. And so there were these other folks that were kind of going on their own, and they were not doing it to spread the word. They were not doing it for Jesus necessarily. They were doing it for themselves. So it's these soapbox preachers that have no other agenda other than to further their own name.
And I mean, I think one of the, like, if I can just speak to the current kind of Corona situation, that I think a good aspect of what's happening is, it's not universal by any stretch, but I had more pastors literally just call me out of the blue yesterday to like have a conversation. And it wasn't like, hey, Phil, you have all the answers, or we have all the answers. It was just like, for the first time really since I've been in ministry, it was like, hey, we all are facing this giant thing that we don't know when it's going to end. We don't entirely know what to do with it. We're all dealing with some fear, if we're honest. Let's talk, let's pray, let's share ideas with one another. And I just think that the envy and rivalry is just so common in church world, right? And maybe for you, you're not in ministry, but you're somebody that, like, you've been in a Bible study and somebody has to like do some weird flex where they know everything, or somebody is trying to outserve somebody else, and you're like, what's your motivation there? I just feel like right now we get a season to go, hey, we're all feeling overwhelmed. Let's just lean in and see what can happen.
Yeah. And he doesn't talk about it right here necessarily, but in much of Paul's writing throughout the New Testament, he is talking about being unified and coming together and working together instead of against each other.
Right.
And so this is just kind of dropping a little seed of, hey, their motivations may not be pure, but the message is still there. So how can we link arms and how can we continue moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think, he basically talks about this kind of second group of people that he would say, hey, there's people that are doing this out of good motives, a good heart. They do it out of love because they know that I was put here for the defense of the gospel. Now, to me, this is like one of the most powerful phrases in the first, 3-4 paragraphs of Philippians, because Paul is literally saying, right, he's like, God put me here for the sake of the gospel. Like that's what he's saying. And I think obviously we can kind of extrapolate what Paul's thinking, what Paul's feeling. But I mean, if I were to ask the question, what suffering has God allowed in my life to advance the gospel, right? I would say that for all of us, we probably could answer that question differently most of the time. But I would say without a doubt, God has allowed the suffering that we're going through right now as a planet,
right? And
he will use it to advance the gospel.
For sure.
He will, like we're already watching it. We're watching church. Even honestly, it was like, oh, we might have in the future, we probably could have talked about this. There were some things kind of on back burners of like, oh, what would it look like to do an online Bible study and all that stuff. And all of a sudden it was just like, we got to do it right now.
Yep, and we're doing it today.
Right. This is happening right now. And I just think I'd love watching churches figure out what it looks like to be the church and not just ask people to come to church. I think there are so many good things that are coming out of this. And I think that can happen on your personal level too. Mm-hmm. Like, what does it look like in your life with even this suffering? I think it's been fun to, like, even for us as a family, think through how do we use this to further the gospel in our home and in our neighborhood, just to be able to ask that question.
Yeah. And I don't want to lessen Paul's actual imprisonment, but right now some of us feel like if we're self-quarantining or if we're, doing social distancing, it can feel a little bit like an imprisonment. And so how can we use this imprisonment to continue to further the gospel? It didn't limit Paul. How can it not limit us?
Yeah, absolutely. If Paul didn't let a real imprisonment hold him back, then we should not let 2020 Netflix binging,
right,
quarantining hold us back. I saw a meme yesterday somewhere, and it was like our parents were asked to go to war. You're asked to sit on your couch. You can do this. And I was like, fair. That's fair. And then in verse 17, he says, the former proclaim out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment, right? Like essentially one up him. And then he says, what then? This is a normal device for Paul where he'll just kind of, it's like he's having a conversation with you, only that in every way, whether in pretense, like the wrong motivations, or in truth, Christ is proclaimed. And in that I rejoice. I just wonder, as you hear Paul kind of share that spirit in verse 18, what is it that you feel like you're kind of hearing him encouraged by, even as he looks at people that he knows are not all doing this for the right motives?
Well, I think it just goes back to he feels like anytime Christ's name is proclaimed, regardless of the motive, Christ's name is being proclaimed. The gospel is moving, and God will continue to use that for good.
Yeah.
And so for Paul, it's almost like, hey, I don't love the way you're doing it, but you're doing something. And so God can use that.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the line before. It takes all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people, right? And I think it's easy in our world to think like, yeah, but that church is like a little bit, there's a little something here. I don't really like how they do this or whatever. But it's like, no, same team, same team. Yep. And so, what does it look like in this hope that within the space of kind of biblical orthodoxy, churches that believe God is real, that Jesus died for us, the Bible's true, like, what does it mean for us to lock arms in a season like this and say, hey, we're in this together? And I think we see this line from Paul, which, I mean, he says literally twice in one verse. We'll pick it up tomorrow. But he says in that, like, even in the midst of this absurd reality where you got mixed motives and people doing this in different ways, I continue to rejoice because the goal of Christ being proclaimed continues to happen. And like I said, I think it's happening more now, even in the midst of what we're going through, than it has in a while. Then I think we can rejoice in that.
Yep. And, historically, we will continue to see people turn to God because of the tragedies, because of their suffering, because of the hurt and the pain and the brokenness. It's almost like this desperation where they don't know what else to do. And so they turn to God.
And I think we live in a time where it's just easy for all of us to feel like we're good enough, we're strong enough, we're smart enough. And so like at some point, those things have to be peeled back. And I think stuff like what we're going through right now with the coronavirus reminds all of us that, like it's completely 150% out of our control. Yeah. And so what does it mean to give that over to God? So awesome. All right, so we've looked at some observation stuff. We've looked at a little bit of interpretation stuff as we've gone along. As you think about application for 12 through 18, what are the questions you're thinking about? How are you processing as you reflect on these verses, ma'am?
Well, I think we sort of alluded to some of the questions that I think will be great application points as we were talking through and observing. But I think it's looking at how does my personal, and I'm going to use the word suffering, but how does my personal suffering right now, how can that be used to further the gospel? How can my moments of pain and whatever it is that we're feeling right now, whether that's fear or shame or whatever, how can that be used, or how can God use your story to help others find him? And then I think it's checking our hearts too and saying, who am I judging right now that I shouldn't be judging?
That's good. I would say underneath one of these questions, I would probably add this language of much more boldness, right? Like what does much more boldness look like for us right now in this season? Yep. I think like from a ministry perspective, I'm just telling you the stuff that we're talking about, even in ways that we're serving our community, like we're leaning into much more boldness because we just know our city needs it. We know our world needs it. And we want to do whatever it takes to help bring hope and healing to people in the ways that are safe, in the ways that are thoughtful, but that truly advance what's happening in the midst of this with people towards Jesus.
Yeah. And like you said, we're going to touch on this a lot more tomorrow, but I also think it's how can we rejoice today? What is something that we can hold on to that is worth being joyful about.
Absolutely. And I think, how can we rejoice today? I would say also in the gospel advancing, right?
Yeah.
Because I think about a lot about, hey, what can I be thankful for today? I can be thankful for a bunch of things, right? You can be thankful for a bunch of things. A bunch of people watching this can be thankful for a bunch of
Right.
things. But I think that the opportunity to be able to take a step back and go like, hey, the hope of heaven came to planet Earth 2,000 years ago. And we've gotten to this place as a culture, and often in large parts of our world, where we feel like we just don't need any help.
Right.
We don't really need God. And so the challenge with that, right, is that we desperately, desperately, desperately need God.
Yep.
And God's patience continues to extend in seasons like this for us to be able to respond and choose to follow him. And like, heaven is going to get more crowded through this crisis. And that's
sure.
like, can I celebrate that? I better believe I can celebrate that. And so for us to be able to stand back and go, yeah, I might be social distancing right now, but there's an eternity where I won't be social distancing.
Right.
And there's an eternity with other people that I will not be social distancing. Like this is a momentary affliction in the span of eternity. And can I celebrate what God does through this? Pat just added, I think this is good. She said, moments of pain recenter me.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true. I think it just has this way of like kind of knocking all the cobwebs off and the stuff that doesn't matter. And you go like, oh, this is important, So absolutely. I totally agree. Well, anything else, ma'am, in our last couple minutes together that you're thinking about, or as you reflect on this passage, you'll be carrying with you into the rest of this day?
Yeah. The only thing that we didn't talk a lot about was in verse 16, where he says, the latter do it out of love. And I just think we talked about it a little bit yesterday, or maybe it was Sunday. What does love require of you? Like, when you don't know what else to do, what does love require? And so I think as we continue to move through uncertainties and unknowns, having love at the center of our core, of our being, we're going to start responding out of love. And that's how we need to respond. It's going to be much easier to respond out of fear or anger or frustration or bitterness. But how can we respond in love?
Yeah, well, I totally agree. And that line is an Andy Stanley line, right, that I think is such a good outflow, right? I have a buddy who's a pastor in California, and he did a Facebook Live thing last night. And he said, fear is this thing in us that really what it reveals, if we're not careful, like as fear gets elevated in us and we allow ourselves to be controlled by fear, what it is we've made safety our God. And I think in the midst of the calling that God's placed on us personally and on us as a church and the global movement of Jesus followers, we want to be smart, we want to be wise, but we want to make sure that safety is not our God. We have one God. We worship one true God, and Jesus is the access to which not only for us, but people around us can know him. So anyway, I really appreciate the time to connect. I really want to try to keep these tighter to about 30 minutes. I know that you guys have stuff to wrangle and Zoom calls to hop on and the rest of your day. But this is helpful. I really, really hope you'll continue to share and comment and engage. Hey, Paul Fox commented too. That's cool. He said, great point, Phil. We can share with non-believers that there will be no social distancing or virus in heaven. Another fantastic part of heaven to look forward to and thank God for today. And Paul is a great guy. He's actually Siri's husband, and he actually was in New York City in one of the buildings on 9/11. And so his perspective around stuff like this is I can't even imagine. And I've said numerous times that I think this will be our kids' 9/11, like the way we think about it, because we lived through it. I think our kids, it's going to feel like a really prolonged, traumatic experience. And the way we think about it and talk about it and remember heaven, I think is central to that. So
for sure.
Anyway, thanks so much for joining us, guys. Really, really appreciate it. I look forward to this each morning. I don't know if Lisa does, but she's doing it. So
I'm showering every morning. It's getting me at least, ready for the day.
That's good. Hey, that's awesome. So anyway, if you guys need anything, if there's ways we can pray for you, be supporting you, please let me know. And if you need help or want to offer help in the community, check out Full Aurora. And we will see you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Have a great day.